Allison. As a full-time education consultant, Allison Zmuda works with educators to grow ideas on how to make learning for students challenging, possible, and worthy of an attempt. Over the past 15 years, Zmuda has shared curriculum, assessment, and instructional ideas, shown illustrative examples, and offered practical strategies of how to get started. Allison Zmuda began as a public high school teacher in Newtown, Connecticut. Her passion for her students and her innovative spirit inspired the writing of her first book, The Competent Classroom, in 2001. Zmuda made the transition from classroom to consultant in 2002, primarily specializing with a handful of long-term clients, PK-12, on multi-year projects to support learning as defined by school and community goals. Based on her inspiration from the schools she works with, powerful thought partners, and lots of reading, she's gone on to write 7 more books, including Transforming Schools in 2004, Breaking Free from Myths of Teaching and Learning, 2010, and her most recent books, Learning Personalized, 2015, and Real Engagement, also in 2015. In addition, Zmuda founded and continues to curate an online community called Learning Personalized to share ideas, innovators, and accomplishments of students, parents, and educators. Allison's going to share with us, how do you create and nurture a culture that motivates all stakeholders to move forward, innovate, and take risks?
Good evening. Can you all hear me? So Adrian didn't get the memo. We decided we were all going to sit. So Adrian's going to sit next to me. And again, I am truly honored to be here. And listening to Adrian talk, we had a couple moments prior to the panel just to chat and get to know one another. I think part of the spirit of the panel is really to also try to demonstrate that we're creating a personalized environment, even amongst the 4 of us. So while I couldn't find out information about Adrian because he doesn't use Twitter or any social media platform, what I've learned about Carrie and Jeff so far is truly inspiring. And again, sitting and chatting with Adrian and Jeff and Carrie, really the theme is twofold. One, focusing on how to get kids to be inspired and interesting and passionate. I think all of us have that in common, because when you see somebody that's passionate, it's contagious. And that's as powerful when you see that in our students. And again, I know in the morning in the student presentations, Mary chatted with me saying that there was one student that I should have taped for you, Allison, because he was describing about what he was doing and what he hoped for the next generation of students coming through this program. And again, it was really around passion. I think the second piece is really thinking hard about how do we get kids to tear down the walls that separate the school world from the real world. Because if the school world is a fake world, then we need a different fake world to imagine and play. Because when it comes to thinking about the school world, we're trying to think hard about how can we make sure that we're tearing down the walls to do more engaging, authentic work. And I'll talk a little bit about that as part of innovation. So I don't know if people that know me well, and I know Jill Thompson and her team came from Charlotte Mecklenburg. They're presenting Tuesday and Wednesday and sharing some of their ideas. But Jill knows me. This is probably the shortest PowerPoint presentation I've ever designed. So only 1 slide, so that's fantastic. So I am guaranteed to make my way through this presentation. When you're thinking about this, I think that something else that we very much share in common is thinking hard about the skills and knowledge that the superintendent was speaking about earlier. How are we training students to think and work and question and challenge? So it's as true when we're thinking about contemporary skills, but also we need to start thinking about the kind of student, the kind of citizen, the kind of learner that we want to be surrounded by, we want to grow with. And again, this is as true for educators as it is true for students. So Ben Akalik and I have been working on a new book, which should be coming out in mid-January. And really, Ben Akalik, I don't know if you're familiar with her. Can anybody raise their hand if they know Ben Akalik? Right, so Ben Akalik is a rock star, and she was one of the authors of Habits of Mind. And she brought me to her kitchen table 2 years ago when I asked her to write a blurb for Learning Personalized. And she said, you know what you really need to do, Allison? You really need to describe the kind of dispositions that personalized learning can continue to cultivate. And I said, I think that's fantastic, but I can't write that without somebody like you. And she goes, so let's do that together. And again, when you're thinking about Benna, when Benna says, let's do that together, and Ann Johnson's here, so she knows Benna as well. When Benna says that, you say, okay, sign me up, let's go. And so when you're thinking about that partnership, trying to think hard about the kind of dispositions that we are trying to create and cultivate in our students, like creating, imagining, and innovating, and listening with understanding and empathy. Those are two wildly powerful, marketable skills, but at the same time, that not only gives you validation, but it actually pushes your thinking so that we can start thinking hard about, is this the right question in the first place? Is there another way to approach a particular problem or challenge? Is there another perspective or point of view that I really need to take time and consideration, pay attention to capture a little more of the whole story? And finally, and most importantly, is self-discovery. Self-discovery is really grounded in a dispositional thinking. The intention here is that we're trying to create students that actually understand themselves a little bit better. When you're starting to look around the country right now, especially in some of the national revisions to the Education Act, we start seeing about things in this space: grit, perseverance, trying to think hard about how can we actually quantify, how can we actually grow that. When it comes to self-discovery, it's interesting, the students are most capable at reflecting on who they are, what their next goal should be, and how to move that forward. I mean, Jessica, in her 3rd grade classroom, she's having kids write SMART goals on a quarterly basis. Again, 3rd grade, they're 8, 9, am I right, Jess? They're writing SMART goals at the age of 8 and 9. When you're starting to think hard about young students, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, they are very good at taking a look at their work. Ron Berger showed this great video where he had a kindergarten classroom and they stacked pizza boxes. Everybody had their own pizza box. And in their pizza box, they put all of the work from that week in. And then on Fridays, they had an opportunity to sit down and open that box up and weed out the work they are most proud of. And then they had an opportunity to explain why they were most proud of it. And they only put that in the box, as opposed to my kiddos, which sent that whole box to the household, right? So the intention here is that when it comes to self-discovery, this is something that students deserve to be part of. All 4 of these are something that students deserve to be part of as learning partners. So I want to echo the panelists that came before me from Adrian, thinking hard about how can we create a little bit of looseness, creating parameters, but at the same time opening up the door for students to have a more meaningful, more engaged, and more powerful opportunity on a daily basis. I want to leave my TED Talk with one moment. And I was talking to Adrian about this before the panel started. I was having a conversation with a dean of a very prestigious business school. And he said to me, there's only one thing I want from the business students that are in my program. And we're still trying hard to figure out how to get them to do it. And I said, what's that? I want them to be able to ask a really good question. That's all I want from them. And I said, how's it going? He goes, not very well. And so when you're thinking about that moment, when you're thinking about the constant volume of questions that we ask as educators, that students ask of us, and you're thinking about that in your mind's eye, how can we cultivate their opportunity to ask a good question? How can we cultivate an opportunity where they believe that they've produced something that's worthy of sharing, that's worthy of accomplishment, that's worthy of recognition? And it doesn't mean that it has to go on the refrigerator on a magnet. It doesn't mean that I have to get a trophy or a medal, but to actually see that growth is incredibly powerful. So I'll stop there, open for questions, and thank you so much.
And I will say this is the first time she and I have ever met.
Yes. Fast friends, this panel.
So the back channel went down with the Wi-Fi, but I got 2 questions texted to me.
Yes, fantastic.
From the audience, and also I might jump down there and see the front channel, if some of you guys have some questions for Allison. So here's the first one. What specific steps do you suggest for teachers to build this culture and implement these personalized filters into our classrooms?
That's a great question. I think the first thing is to actually, these filters are going to be part of the presentation that I'm doing. I think Jess and Noel are also going to have that be part of their presentations. So all you have to do is take a look at this. It's a pretty simple framework, yes? Nod your heads, yes or no. I mean, give me feedback. Awesome. Fantastic. So when you're thinking about, well, this framework that's no longer up in front of me. Yes. Actually start taking that out for a test drive. You can take any assignment, any performance, and roll it through the 4 filters. To what extent does this enable students to have some degree of opportunity to say their point of view, to actually be part of the problem or the conversation? When it comes to co-creation, to what extent can we actually envision multiple avenues? Now again, this is very important. Personalized learning and differentiation are 2 very different things, right? So differentiation is still very much teacher-generated, teacher-controlled. Nod your heads. Right, so from an educator's point of view, it is the first step to personalized learning, but it stays very clear that the teacher is still controlling all of the airspace, and the students have an opportunity to choose or navigate which way do I want to go down based on what the teacher set up for me. I actually had an opportunity to work with Chris Tabling and his staff at their high school. And one of the ahas that they had was starting to think about, I give kids an opportunity, like do 3 things or this 4th choose your own adventure option. And I asked them the question, how many kids actually have taken you up on the choose your own adventure? Like, come see me and you can design your own thing. And they said, no one. And I think that's the challenge, is that if you really care about the co-creation piece, you're going to start giving fewer examples, but more elbow room for them to be part of the co-creation of the design. So again, that's the spirit of co-creation. And social construction, too, is the last major piece. A lot of times there are some really fascinating, interesting projects that are supposed to be done in a day and a half, max 4 or 5 days, with the exception of wild cards. Now, here's a wild card. Do I have anybody from Mountain Ridge Middle School right across the way? Yes, fantastic. So Mountain Ridge Middle School, the iCapstone project that just finished at the end of April, yes? So I know that Russell started it, and Deb Fox Gleesman, am I saying fantastic? Did I say your name correctly? correctly? Yeah, and so when you're thinking about the work that you've done, it was a Herculean effort, nod your head, right? It was a Herculean effort in the creation and the implementation of it. But it takes a level of commitment and engagement from not only the teachers, but the students to actually move through that 9-week experience. So there are exceptions to the rule like that, like Genius Hour, where students have fair degree of control over what they're doing. But my mission and my passion is to make this part of what normal looks like. Because I don't want this to be a co-curricular or extracurricular moment. I want this to be something where students are engaged in relevant, important information that helps them make sense of the world outside and the world inside simultaneously. Yep. Yep. Yeah. So thanks for that question, and I want to respond to it in about 30 seconds or a minute. Is that okay? So I think it's an important question in terms of relevance, in terms of applicability. But I've seen a 9th grade global studies program actually take a hard look at what UNICEF has put out there and is designing an entire course around United Nations and UNICEF problems. So they are taking action on how do we create clean drinking water for every single country. Is that a viable possibility? You can start thinking about that not just from a poverty and equity issue, but starting to think about it from an engineering issue. There is another 10th grade school classroom set that I'm working with who are actually using case studies to pursue interesting problems and challenges that are very much directly connected to their coursework. There are lots of examples. I know that fully agreed, but I also think the intention right now, and this is something that I was hearing the superintendent speak of a little bit earlier, is trying to make sure that we are not heard as educators. And I think that this is something, is my mic still on, by the way? Okay.
That's all right. You got it.
All right, so I'm incredibly worried that educators have been hampered to the point where they don't feel like they can innovate. This is something that I'm desperately worried about. And the intention here is that trying to resurrect the creativity, the agility, and the adaptability of the educators, as well as expecting that from our students. That's why the 4 filters are as powerful for the kids as they are for the adults. So I think it's an incredibly important problem and challenge as well, especially mindful of the external data points that we are all beholden to. Standardized testing is an important indicator, but it cannot be the sole indicator of achievement. At the same time, some of the new innovations that are starting to show up on a national and a state level make me equally worried. So I think the intention here is trying to, one classroom at a time, one district and division at a time, to continue to move through something as simple like this to continue to create that relevant, meaningful content.
Thank you for those questions. For those answers, Allison.